Worldpeacefull, and this poem slash philosophy I'm going to read for you is something that's been going through my mind for the last few days. I get inspiration around certain things that I need to talk about. And what inspiration is, just for those who don't know about it, it's just everybody gets it, but not everybody listens to it. I just happen to be one that listens to it. What it is a prompting. I need to do something. I need to read this poem. And it keeps coming back to me, and I'm not thinking about it. So that's how I know it's inspired. It just keeps coming back to remind me. And I know the poem I'm about to read for you is a significant one. I was at the Shrine of Remembrance last night, and I went to a talk on a new type of museum memorial. So it's war and peace type memorial. So there were soldiers present, there were academics present, and there was a general audience there, all interested to learn about how the shrine may change in the future as, in a sense, a mirror of the society that's changing. It was the most fascinating talk. I'll tell you more about it after I read this poem. But after I was, reflecting on it, this poem came up for me that I should say something. So this is called Civil Manifesto. It was written at 4 a.m. in the morning in Canberra, and I did definitely get moved to write it. I woke up, and I'm not an early morning person. You can be sure it's inspiration, because that's the only thing that's going to get me out of bed at 4. And I was actually sleeping in a caravan at the time at my mother's place, and I just felt this incredible desire to write this poem. So this came from that moment. It was it was 2006 that I wrote it. So we're 2017 now. So you can do your sums, 13 years ago, still relevant. A civil manifesto is dedicated to all those who seek a society worthy of all the peoples, who in sobriety seek a new road leading to sustainable prosperity for all the children of the world, no matter their colour or status. A civil manifesto shines on the shrine of remembrance, for the military-industrial complex values objects of war over resolution of conflict, hanging plaques of sacrifice over returned soldiers in good health, lest we forget that war is never just to the victims or combatants. A civil manifesto values productive work that is satisfying and offered in equality. Equal opportunity is valued for all society, no matter gender, creed, or culture. For payment is fair compensation for time, effort, and the opportunity cost of a hard-working life. Time in lieu that balances work, family, and leisure to live life with pleasure. Fixed hours conducive to well-being, financial security, and full participation. For contracts, contract conditions and the marginal propensity to consume, as the multiplier effect deflates utility and real wealth. Housing prices become the negative gear that sends us in reverse, as there is no building in sights. For unions disorganise as management cannot retrain or retain contractors in industrial anarchy. The strategy of pauperising the working poor fuels road rage and civil disobedience, inflates the cost of living, fast breeds social exclusion and tensions. For the choice is to sign on the bottom line or stand at the end of the unemployment queue, waiting for rights and justice to return in another depression. A civil manifesto facilitates open education as an investment in intellectual propriety. For the greatest asset adds value in realised talent, not inventory, stocks, or bonded labour. For a society that values true equality provides equal access without upfront fees or genetic inheritance as barriers to entry. A civil manifesto recognises the treasury of real democracy as a right inherent and not earned. For active democracy is representative of the people by the people. It is not succession of a master class or privileged elite. It is enshrined in freedoms of liberty, fraternity, equality, and just laws. Constitutional, civil, political, economic, and cultural rights signal an advanced society that monitors Human Rights Watch with trade, for everyone has the right to be human. A civil manifesto adheres to just rules of law and alternative dispute resolution for natural justice, for punishment is regressive and circular. Many can learn from mistakes when awoken. Restorative justice faces crime with consequences that seeks illumination rather than condemnation. For it is easy to blame and harder to rectify the societal problems in truth. A civil manifesto aims to restore the balanced ecological footprint within natural limits. For humans are divorced from their true nature. To live beyond means is to live on credit. Yet there is no excess capacity in a closed system. For to consume without replacement as growth relies on flawed infinite economic modelling, choosing current stakeholders over stewards of future generations. Thus the inheritance is raided before its due date. Divestment of a generation with no credit rating is not renewable when fossils fuel old-fashioned thinking as clean and green. A civil manifesto promotes corporate social responsibility as progressive survival of economy. For internalising externalities yields greater growth in innovation and efficiencies in trusts. As citizens realise the consumer is voting rights, citizens demand yields on sustainable options, and arbitrage is gambling outlaws. Bonds return secure investments for the future, as ethical investments are naturally selected by renewable forces of demand and supply. A civil manifesto inspires leadership that serves truth over righteous ideologies. Politics as collaborative community-based forums. Business as employee-employer cooperatives. Sustainability as deep ecology, and I've got that in brackets as an E, factored into real costs of extraction, manufacture and consumption for GDP, gross domestic product, equals G, government spending, plus investment, plus consumption, plus exports minus imports, plus ecological value minus ecological cost. This becomes the real wealth that factors in a future. The media is fair, accurate with social conscience, as people enjoy the true bounty of inner security, valuing happiness and freedom over unfounded fears and negative spin as control. For all this is achievable when wisdom and common sense informs the political will of us all. For each is responsible for the world we create. For our purpose on earth is to live peacefully as nature intended. What I'll do with this particular poem, there's a bit of economics in it. So I will put on my video, you'll see underneath where I explain what the video is. I'll have a link to the poem, the written poem, and what I'll do is I'll add in some explanations of what some of the economics means, because you won't know what I was talking about in some of this. There's also a little bit of a play on words, so you need to see the words themselves. This was sent to every member of Parliament at the time. I'm pretty sure it was during John Howard's era. So it was back in 2006. And of course, I got no response from anyone, but that's okay. I'm used to that. We're at liberty to write into our politicians, and we may well receive a drafted general response that everyone receives. But I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that none of us really feel engaged with politics at all. We see it as remote. We don't see it as representing us. So clearly the reason this poem has kept coming up in my mind, and it came up in my mind prior to going to this event. I actually forgot about the event. I only realised a few days ago that it was coming. So this poem's been popping into my head since the last video I published. And that's because I actually mention Shrine of Remembrance. What's interesting about that, and this is something I reflected on last night coming home, was they've got a gas flame, and I'm going to write to them and talk to them about the gas flame and the fact that wars have been fought over energy, as we've seen in Iraq, and the setting on fire of these oil wells, the environmental destruction through war. What was fascinating about this talk last night was there was a soldier there. He was quite young. He would have been probably in his 40s, I reckon. And he played just a tiny bit of footage, probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute, of footage of being in a position in Afghanistan where they're looking down on a valley and there's huge mountains. Mountains were magnificent. And he had a lot of gunfire. And you'd have to be there, but for him it was the most frightening moment of his life. He was shaking when he was trying to unzip his pouch, he said. It really affected him, and he heard the alarm over the radio, real panic and stress from his mates. And he was very worried that people might be getting killed because there was a lot of exchange, gunfire exchange. Now he wants to have the shrine as a place where other soldiers can go and talk because they don't feel they're able to talk to their families or the public about the way they're feeling. Many come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I've interviewed soldiers too when I was running my radio program. Some of them were refuseniks actually, and not some of them, all of them. And they were forming groups to encourage other soldiers to withdraw from the military. Now, one gentleman in the audience last night is definitely an ex-soldier, probably from Vietnam War, I would guess. He was saying that he had great concerns about why soldiers were being sent to war now. He thought they were going to preserve freedom and democracy, and he no longer believes that. And so the whole point of the discussion was, how should this shrine of remembrance be portrayed? And of course, I said my bit, which is about truth, and I talked about peace education is very, very important. The curator of this shrine, who's doing educational programs, is also interested in anti-bullying. So she's been clearly able to see the link with the bullying through force, through arms, and she's wanting to see a new future too. I could see that. I was actually very inspired listening to her, and it's not to dishonor the soldiers. I honored them myself, and anyone that's gone through any form of trauma, no matter who they are, I feel a deep respect for, in that they're suffering, and as a peace educator, we need to reach out to everybody. But there also has to be truth-telling, and that was the theme that came up last night, was the truth. We're not versions of history, not one side of history where our side is this and the other side's the enemy. I think what's really coming up these days is a recognition that there is no enemy, that both sides saw the other as the enemy. That rules out the enemy. It's just a mind pattern that's been conditioned by militaries to create a willingness within soldiers to see someone who is bad, to see someone who is in some way on the other side, and they could take our freedoms, take our jobs, or whatever it is that's being put to soldiers to encourage them to fight. There is definitely strong mateship because they are protecting each other, and it's very frightening. Whenever you've been in any frightening experience, you bond with the people you're with. But I have to say that as a peace educator, what I've seen is that the peacemakers are not honoured that much. I went to Gandhi's ashram, his museum in Ahmedabad in India. This is in Gujarat, the state of Gujarat. And I went to the library and I looked at the books that have been written about Gandhi's life, because he had nothing at the end of his life. He had You know, when I say nothing, very minimal. He had a pair of shoes. He had a staff, which is his long staff that he walked with, spinning wheel, and the loincloth that he wore. That was it. And glasses. He had glasses. I remember, I'll tell you the experience, another profound experience of my life. When I travelled around the world, one of the most important places for me to go was India. Not on some great spiritual quest, although my life is a spiritual quest anyway. I'm having it all the time. So I caught a train, overnight train from New Delhi to Gujarat. And I'll just explain the experience for those who've never been to India. I remember meeting up with another Rotary Peace Fellow, actually, and a couch surfing host, both Indian men, who took me to this railway station in New Delhi. I think no, it wasn't New Delhi. It was Mumbai. It was Mumbai. Sorry, Mumbai. Just have to remember. I've been around. Anyway, it was it was a raining day, rain pouring, just endless rain at that day. And I remember looking up at the flats, and they're not flats like you'd have here in Australia. They're very run down, very poor conditions. And it was very dark. And I just felt there was some, anxiety around going to the train on my own. And I stand out, as you can imagine, a blonde woman, blue eyes, and you kind of hope that there's another Westerner around, so you're not quite alone. But I was. I went to the station. They dropped me off, and I walked to the platform, and it was all Indian people. I do love the Indian people, but I just noticed I stood out, and I went and sat down, and someone helped me out too. I was given advice not to take food from people because I could get sick, or to be careful with my things, to hold them close to me, So I went and sat in the carriage, and this lovely family were there, Gujarati family. They didn't speak English. And of course, the mother, she offered me food, and I couldn't say no because someone's offering me something. So I ate with them, and she was supposed to have the top bunk, so I swapped bunks with her, and I slept on the top, but I wasn't concerned about my things. For some reason, I don't seem to care. It's a part of me that's pretty easygoing. Had a really good trip, and it was second class. There was no air conditioning. And I caught a tuk-tuk from the train station at the other end in the early morning. And of course, my only area of conflict when I travelled the world was taxi drivers, always ripping me off, always. And I argued, and I tried to negotiate and bargain, and and I was getting pretty tough by the time I got to India. I wasn't quite the walkover, but he did take me on a little bit of a scenic route. He did. And I ended up at Gandhi's ashram. And I just remember walking in, and this is something I mentioned last night at Shrine, was this is the place of truth. For me, it was like coming home. And it's funny, I'm speaking and feeling tears again coming up within me. I honestly felt I was coming home because I'd seen so much dishonesty in the world. I had a long-term dispute, and I saw the dishonesty around that. And for me, the virtues of Gandhi were kind of like a light in my darkness. This was a man who was like a mirror to the world, but chose not to hit back. And I really, really respect him. I know there are people who think negatively of him now in India, and I'm very sad to hear that, because when you look into his life, I studied him and I did peace studies at La Trobe University. When I studied his beautiful work, I saw principled nonviolence. He talked about satyagraha. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly. The Hindus would do a much better job than me. Or satyagraha, which means holding on to truth, is a rough translation. I'm sure it's got a deeper meaning. And there's also ahimsa, which is nonviolence. I felt I could cry, so just if I do, just know it's inspired, it's nothing. I feel a real connection to what he has said and done in his life. Non-violence is the greatest power. People think power is in violent weaponry. People think it's in modes of control. They don't understand that true leadership is actually service. Real leadership is service. You're serving those you lead. And all it is really taking a responsibility. That's all leadership is. It's taking responsibility and being prepared to be upfront. You're willing to wear it if something happens. When we see leaders these days who shirk their responsibilities and don't resign when they've done the wrong thing, you can be sure they're there for power. So I walked into the ashram and it was very warm, and they had concrete sort of slab benches that you could sit on or lie on. I actually lay on them because I was really tired and it was hot. But I saw all the pictures of Gandhi everywhere and I just felt not alone. Why is truth so hard for all of us? Why is it so hard? I find it easy to speak the truth. It's not hard, to be honest. You know, but we've created such a complexity in our life where people are forced to lie, or people lie to cover themselves because they don't trust the people around them. It comes from lack of trust, dishonesty. If we can develop greater senses of trust and community and support, you'll get less lying happening. But Gandhi's work with truth was even deeper than just not telling a lie. It was more to do with he saw that truth was God. So he's saying that spiritually speaking, whatever you perceive that to be, it doesn't have to, it's not, he's not necessarily saying this God is on some throne looking down. He doesn't use that mythology. Truth is God. That comes from within. He was seeing this higher intelligence coming from within truth, like as a purity. So he went and did many experiments with truth. There's actually a book called Experiments with Truth that was put together about his life, where he was practicing abstination. He stopped having sex. He channeled his energy into serving the people over and above his own family. And there was a lot of criticism about that in India because Indians very much value their families and they put them first. There were also sexual practices, you know, where he was abstaining, but he, you know, he had some family, and people looked down on that. They really did. But I don't think they, I can only say what my resonance is. I feel that he had honourable intentions no matter what he did. But I do think he was misunderstood. And he, being a leader, I remember when there was conflict in Mumbai, when, you know, petition was in the midst of happening. There was conflict between the Muslims and the Hindus. And he went to Mumbai and, you know, he fasted and he planned to fast till he died. He got very weak and he was, I think, having some kidney failure. And the people stopped fighting. And what it was they kept thinking about him dying. He was dying because they were fighting. So the more they fight, the more he'd die. And some could say, well, they could argue that was forced, but it's not. He couldn't live in a world that was violent. And his only way of protesting that really was to fast. So they did stop. There was thousands and thousands. I'm sure there was more than that were fighting, but he got them all to stop, and not one was fighting in the end. And then petition happened. But that was the whole political situation happening with the dividing of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. So in the ashram, I walked into the library. I was feeling the tears before I entered the library, which is the bookshop, only because I felt a very strong sense of presence around me. And I have to be honest, it was Gandhi's presence that I felt. And I can remember, and I could cry, I can remember picking up a book on Gandhi and Vinobi, I think his name was. He was an educator. I tried not to think of Gandhi. I was thinking of anything but Gandhi. Think of Mother Teresa. Think of anything. Don't think of Gandhi. And I took the book up to the counter, and then I saw the Satyagrahi, and these are the followers of Gandhi who wear white. He would never advocate for followers because he's a great believer in people probably following themselves. He didn't really want a following. Anyway, I gave my books to her and I did start crying. And I said, I'm not unhappy, I'm just inspired. I said, I'm inspired by Gandhi. And she said, would you like a tour of the ashram? And I said, I would love that. So I had a look around the ashram, all these incredible, simple buildings and old trees that would have been planted at the time Gandhi was around. And there was a few stray dogs around. Anyway, she took me to his room and unlocked the door. I was very lucky. I got the opportunity to go into his room, and the spinning wheel was there. And the staff was in the corner. And I dreamed once, I've said this before, that I dreamed he came to me once. And it was very dark in the dream. And I just remember seeing him with just the glasses but no eyes. And I felt lower than my feet in the dream. I felt very humble, is what that means. And he had the long staff. So he was like on the march to the Sea of Dandi, which is very famous, where he collected salt. He was defying a British salt tax. Anyway, in the dream, it was very short and sweet. It was just him appearing to me, and I felt I was seen. I felt acknowledged. Maybe because I've always promoted non-violence for a long time now. Anyway, sitting in the room, I had the staff with me. I held his staff, and the spinning wheel was there, and the Satyagrahi, this beautiful lady, was on the other side, and we talked about peace education. I saw his own framework that he had up on the wall to do with non-violence. You can look on my website if you want to see some of the pictures from India. It's Ahmedabad. It was very profound. And then I went outside and I remember reading his prayer. I was very deeply involved in reading the prayer. And something was touching my leg. I looked down and there's a dog pressing my leg. It had the most beautiful eyes when it looked at me. It was incredible. That was very profound. And it was funny, in my world trip, I knew I had to go to India. I knew I had to go to Gandhi's ashram. You know, I was thinking of going to Porbandar, which is where Gandhi was born. That's where he grew up, which is on the sea. Right, he was in a coastal village. I believe his family were Brahmin and leaders as well in the community. And of course, for those who don't know about Gandhi, he studied law and became a barrister, QC, I think he was, in the end. And he studied in London and went across to South Africa, and there was a lot of disputation in South Africa with apartheid. Gandhi got thrown off a train. He was in and out of jail for defying the laws in South Africa, which meant they had to have a security card and identification, and that any of their homes could be raided by the South African police/military. So there was lots of, many of them were brought to South Africa as indentured labour. So they were trying to get money to send home to their families. This is what poverty does. And then people get demonised as threatening the locals who were there. South African people wouldn't have liked them, but they were also, the Afrikaans were in deep tension, with the African people, the various tribal groups. And of course, apartheid was keeping them separate, and they saw them as, more inferior to them because of their technology and education and so forth. And we've seen this superiority all over the world. And in fact, this poem that I've written is really about bringing a civil manifesto, which is really about fairness. It's about balance. It's about respect. It's not about control and force. It's about really giving civil, political, economic and cultural rights to everyone. So it's very much in the same sort of feeling of what Gandhi was about too. And it's about illuminating that we're people and that we have responsibilities here to each other and also to the next generation. We seem to be, as I said, raiding the inheritance before its due date because we're living off credit. We're not caring about the future generations, nor are we giving much thought, as we're still extracting and still producing. We're still having built-in obsolescence in products. We're still marketing. We haven't changed, and this has huge impact on the ecological problems. Now, I'm here in Melbourne, Australia. This is nearly April, and we're having humidity outside. Now, some in the media have said, oh, it's Melbourne weather. It's not. We're also having a cold night. The oscillations in temperature are massive, and I'm amazed that people are not concerned about that. Now, in my Civil Manifesto, what I talked about was reformulating what is called GDP, which is gross domestic product. Essentially, that equation, which I pointed out was government spending plus investment plus consumption plus exports minus imports. That's the GDP equation. It's calculating all this expenditure in the economy. It also counts in if there's, in economics, we talk about externalities, which is pollution, external social costs and what have you. They're all costed into GDP as if it's a productive economy, but they could be negative costs, cleanups. They could be cleaning up. It could be higher welfare because people can't get jobs. The welfare will come obviously off taxation. That'll be the revenue stream there, but it also primes the economy because people who get that money actually spend it in the economy. So you can get false, if there's a lot of people unemployed and they're all spending in the economy, you can actually say, well, things are growing because of that. Possibly, it'd be marginal. But nonetheless, let's just say it's a very confusing equation as it doesn't factor in the ecological costs. So everything we extract and pump into the atmosphere, we don't have measures for the ecological cost to the planet. And this is a non-renewable planet. Unless we're using solar panels, things that we can renew, even though the physical material panels themselves are not renewable, you can still generate energy in a way that would be beneficial to the community rather than fossil fuels. That's why I said, what did I say, old fossils fueling. That was a play on words, wasn't it? Just having a bit of a scan over here. So they're sort of fueling this continuous expansion. We haven't really valued wisdom and common sense, nor are we really living the democracy that would have been putting us in a completely different place today had we really had a truly functional, active democracy, rather than one where politicians are stipulating their policies, but pretty much implementing what they think should happen and legislating as a result. The public themselves aren't really given a great deal of say on that. They're not given any say in actual fact. And all I can say is from being a market analyst where I've actually polled people myself, there is a lot of common sense in people. And what I find is always I learn whenever I ask people what they think, I get surprised because they expand my perception of life. Because there's many different views of reality out there. It's not just the one way. But if you're not open to diverse viewpoints, you're not actually going to learn a lot from your society and you're going to think you're right. So, yeah, we've got real issues through this lack of values, this lack of democracy that we've created. And harking back to the Shrine of Remembrance and the various wars, they've been fought over energy. So we're talking industrial influences, moving militaries to certain parts of the world in order to protect what they would see as their own interests. And it's the self-interest lying beneath all of this that's problematic because we don't see the world as one. We see the world as all these separate competing interests, all seeking market share, all competing like a football game. But the truth is we're on one planet and we can't all live like the United States. This is the real reality of this. So if negativity and fear keeps being fueled, we're going to end up in greater conflicts. We have to learn peace education. We have to learn conflict resolution. We've got to stop using the law in order to silence people or to win something or to make money. We've got to look at natural justice, doing what's fair because it benefits us all. So this is coming back to family. So I just thought I would share my experience that inspired this discussion, and my own wish for a civil society that truly is in the spirit of democracy, not just here in Australia, but I'd like to see the peoples of the world having more of a say, given their lives are being affected by decisions made by industrialists and governments. We have to come together now. It's not about fighting each other, it's about finding each other. So I will leave you with that contemplation. Send you much peace, love, and healing. Take care. Bye.